I am Eric Wilson, 32 years old and a decorated Marine, finally heading home for Thanksgiving after 7 years of active service. My stomach is in knots thinking about seeing my family again. Dad never understood why his oldest son chose military boots over business suits. Mom just follows his lead. My brother took the path my father wanted for me. Nobody but Amanda ever supported my decision to serve. I tucked my medals inside my jacket pocket. No point showing what they would never appreciate. If you are watching this, let me know where you are viewing from and hit subscribe if you have ever had your achievements dismissed by the people who should care the most. Growing up in our wealthy Connecticut suburb was like living in a pressure cooker disguised as paradise. Manicured lawns, luxury cars in every driveway, and expectations higher than our 3-story colonial house. My father, Thomas Wilson, built a real estate empire from nothing, expanding across 3 states before I was 10 years old. Wilson Properties became his identity, his legacy, and the future he planned for his sons without ever asking what we wanted. From my earliest memories, Dad made it clear that Kevin and I would someday take over the family business. Kevin, younger by 2 years, embraced this destiny from day one. He collected business cards the way other kids collected baseball cards. He shadowed Dad at the office on weekends while I was drawn to different heroes. My bedroom walls told our different stories. Kevin had stock market charts and business magazine covers. I had pictures of military helicopters and stories of Medal of Honor recipients. The divide was obvious to everyone except my father, who viewed my interests as a phase to outgrow. My mother Sandra was beautiful, elegant, and completely devoted to my father. She managed our social calendar with military precision but never challenged his decisions about our futures. When tensions rose between Dad and me, she would place her manicured hand on his arm and say, "Thomas, dear," in that soft voice that meant the discussion was becoming uncomfortable. Then she would change the subject to something pleasant but inconsequential. It was her way of keeping peace, even if that peace was built on avoiding important conversations. Kevin became everything my father wanted. Perfect grades, Harvard Business School, and then straight into a vice president position at Wilson Properties. His office was next to Dad's by the time he was 26. At family gatherings, their matching custom suits and identical confident strides around the room showed everyone they were cut from the same cloth. The only person who ever really saw me was my sister Amanda. 3 years younger than me, she was the peacemaker in our family. While she followed the expected path, attending an elite women's college and returning to work in the charitable foundation arm of the family business, she secretly supported my different dreams. She would slip military history books into my Christmas gifts and listen for hours as I talked about what I wanted to do with my life. "Just because you're different doesn't mean you're wrong, Eric," she would tell me. "Some people build buildings. Others protect what's already been built." September 11th happened during my senior year of college. While I had been reluctantly attending Wharton's undergraduate business program to appease my father, that day crystallized everything for me. 3 weeks later, I made the decision that would permanently fracture our family. The night I told them I was enlisting in the Marines instead of accepting my position at Wilson Properties remains burned in my memory. We sat around the cherrywood dining table that had been in my mother's family for generations. The chandelier light caught the crystal glasses and sterling silver as my father proposed a toast to my future. "To Eric," he said, raising his glass, "who will begin bringing his fresh ideas to our executive team next month." I set my glass down without drinking. "I need to tell you all something." The room fell silent. Dad's expression shifted from pride to concern as I explained my decision to enlist. His face transformed through confusion to disbelief to rage in the span of seconds. "This is absurd," he finally sputtered, setting his glass down so hard that red wine sloshed onto the white tablecloth. "You have a degree from Wharton. I have spent a fortune preparing you to take over this company someday." "I never asked for that," I said quietly. "This is something I need to do." "Need to do," he thundered. "Playing soldier when you have real responsibilities. This is childish fantasy, not a career for a Wilson. Kevin sat back with a slight smirk, perhaps relieved that he would now have our father's undivided approval. Mom dabbed at the wine stain, avoiding everyone's eyes. Only Amanda reached under the table to squeeze my hand in silent support. The argument escalated until my father issued his ultimatum, standing at the head of the table, his face flushed with anger. You make your choice right now, Eric. This business and this family, or this ridiculous military detour. If you walk out that door to enlist, do not expect to be welcomed back. I stood up slowly. I report to basic training next week. My father turned his back on me. My mother wept silently. Kevin studied his wineglass with sudden interest. Only Amanda followed me to my room as I packed a duffel bag. He does not mean forever, she whispered, helping me fold a sweatshirt. He is just shocked. Give him time. But time only hardened the division. Amanda drove me to the recruitment office, hugging me tightly before I walked in. It would be the last genuine embrace from my family for 7 years. During basic training, I wrote letters home that went unanswered. During my first deployment, I called on holidays and birthdays, having brief, strained conversations with my mother while my father refused to come to the phone. Amanda sent care packages with notes about family events I was missing, trying to keep me connected to a family that had essentially excised me. I missed Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, family vacations. I sent photos that were never displayed, shared stories in emails that were never acknowledged. Meanwhile, I rose through the ranks, earned commendations, formed a new family among my fellow Marines who understood what civilian families often could not. My unit became my brothers. My commanding officers became my mentors. And somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting my biological family to recognize what I was building. I stopped needing their approval. Until Amanda called and said, "Dad is asking about you. He wants you to come home for Thanksgiving this year." Just like that, the walls I had built came tumbling down, and I found myself agreeing to return to the place that had rejected everything I had become. The Wilson family estate looked exactly the same, as though frozen in time. The long, curved driveway lined with maple trees, the imposing colonial facade with its perfect symmetry, the discreet wealth that whispered rather than shouted. 7 years had changed nothing here, while changing everything about me. I parked my modest rental car behind a row of luxury vehicles, feeling immediately out of place. My service uniform felt suddenly constricting, though I had worn it with pride just hours before. For a moment, I considered changing into civilian clothes I had packed, then decided against it. This was who I was now. If reconciliation was possible, it would need to begin with honesty. Amanda opened the door before I could knock, throwing her arms around me with genuine joy. You made it. God, look at you, she stepped back to examine me, her eyes bright. The uniform suits you, Eric. Before I could respond, my mother appeared in the entryway. Sandra Wilson had barely aged, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her cashmere sweater exactly matching her earrings. Her smile seemed frozen somewhere between genuine pleasure and social obligation. Eric, welcome home, she embraced me briefly, the scent of her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. You look well, she glanced at my uniform without comment, then gestured toward the living room. Everyone is having drinks before dinner. Everyone, apparently included my father and brother, both standing by the fireplace in near-identical postures, tumblers of whiskey in hand, and a woman I had never met who stood close to Kevin with proprietary familiarity. My father looked older, his hair now silver rather than the dark brown I remembered. He gave me a curt nod that might have been mistaken for respect by someone who did not know him. Eric, you found the place all right then. As though I were a business associate visiting for the first time, not his son returning to his childhood home. Kevin extended a hand formally. Brother, welcome back to civilian territory, his emphasis made clear the distinction he was drawing. This is my wife, Natalie. You missed the wedding, of course. Natalie was exactly what I would have expected Kevin to choose, sleek and polished, with an appraising gaze that took in my uniform with barely concealed distaste. "So you are the soldier in the family," she said, accepting my handshake with cool fingers. "Kevin mentioned you were in the army." "Marines," I corrected gently. "There is a difference." "Is there?" she asked with a small laugh that suggested the distinction was meaningless to her. "How fascinating that you chose that career path when you could have been part of Wilson Properties." My father interjected before I could respond. "Drink, Eric. Still Scotch, or has the military changed your tastes too?" I accepted the tumbler he handed me, noting he remembered my preference despite everything. Small victories. The conversation flowed around me rather than including me. My father and brother discussed recent property acquisitions, market fluctuations, and business competitors with the easy familiarity of men who shared not just blood but purpose. My mother occasionally added details about the social connections that facilitated certain deals. Natalie contributed sharp observations about competitor weaknesses that made it clear she was not just Kevin's wife but a business asset. I stood slightly apart, sipping my scotch, feeling increasingly like an intruder. The framed photos on the mantel caught my eye, a visual history of the family that had continued without me. Kevin's wedding, parents at charity galas, vacations in locations I recognized. None included me, as though my existence had been carefully edited out of the family narrative. "So," Natalie said during a lull in conversation, turning to me with sudden interest that felt predatory rather than genuine, "have you killed people in your work?" The room went silent. My father cleared his throat. "Natalie, perhaps not appropriate dinner conversation." "I am just curious," she persisted, examining me like an unusual specimen. "Kevin says you were in combat zones. That is what soldiers do, is it not? Kill the enemy." I set my glass down carefully. "Marines do whatever the mission requires. Sometimes that means combat. More often it means protecting civilians, building infrastructure, gathering intelligence, or providing humanitarian aid. Like when your unit helped establish that school for girls in Afghanistan," Amanda interjected quickly. "Eric sent me photos. The building looked amazing when you finished." I shot her a grateful look, but my father was already speaking over her. "The Richardson development is looking promising for next quarter. Kevin has restructured the financing to maximize the tax advantages." The deliberate subject change was painfully obvious. I mentioned some of my fallen comrades, thinking perhaps acknowledging sacrifice might bridge our differences. "We lost 2 good men establishing security for that school project. Staff Sergeant Taylor left behind twin daughters not much older than Amanda was when I left." My mother flinched visibly. My father checked his watch. Kevin suddenly found the ice in his glass fascinating. "Dinner should be ready," my mother announced, standing with obvious relief. "Shall we move to the dining room?" As we followed her through the house, Amanda fell into step beside me. "Give them time," she whispered. "This is awkward for everyone." "They cannot even acknowledge what I do," I replied under my breath. "How much more time do they need?" She had no answer for that. Neither did I. The dining room was a masterpiece of traditional elegance, exactly as I remembered it. The table gleamed beneath precisely arranged fine china, crystal, and silver. Place cards in my mother's distinctive calligraphy marked our positions, mine notably furthest from my father at the head of the table. We took our seats as Patricia, the longtime family housekeeper, began serving the first course. My father cleared his throat and bowed his head. We all followed suit out of ingrained habit. "Lord, we give thanks for this food and for the blessings of family and success. We are especially grateful for Kevin's continued achievements in expanding our business legacy, for his recent promotion, and for the bright future of Wilson Properties under his leadership. We ask your continued blessing on our endeavors. Amen." Not a word about my return or service. Not a single acknowledgement. I kept my head bowed a moment longer than necessary, gathering composure. "Promotion?" I asked, forcing brightness into my tone as I unfolded my napkin. "Congratulations, Kevin." My brother straightened imperceptibly, pride evident in his posture. "Dad has named me company president, effective January 1st. He is stepping into a chairman role. Kevin has earned it, my father added, his voice warm with approval. The Atlantic Shores development was entirely his initiative, and it will be our most profitable project to date. We purchased an estate in Greenwich to celebrate, Natalie added, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she reached for her wine glass. 7 bedrooms. The master suite is divine. I offered appropriate congratulations while trying to ignore the obvious subtext. This was what real achievement looked like in the Wilson family. This was what earned parental pride. My mother turned to me with a smile that seemed both conciliatory and cautious. You know, Eric, there could still be a place for you in the company. Your military experience might translate to our security division or perhaps project management. Something could be arranged if you were ready to turn your life around. Turn my life around. As though I had been wandering aimlessly rather than serving with purpose. My life is not off track, Mom, I replied carefully. I was recently selected for promotion to major, actually. And my unit completed a humanitarian mission in Syria that helped evacuate over 300 civilians from a conflict zone. I tried to share the story of how we had converted abandoned buildings into emergency medical facilities, working alongside doctors from Médecins Sans Frontières, but Kevin interrupted before I could finish. Speaking of conversions, our adaptive reuse project downtown has been featured in 3 business publications this month. Taking that defunct industrial space and creating luxury lofts has transformed the entire neighborhood. Amanda made a valiant attempt to redirect the conversation. Both of you are building things just in different ways. Eric creates safe spaces in dangerous areas, while you create new residential opportunities here. There's room to appreciate both. My father dismissed this with a wave of his hand. Let us be realistic, Amanda. One is a real achievement with tangible, lasting results. The other is government-funded cleanup work that any trained monkey could perform. I set down my fork with deliberate care. With respect, Dad, you have no idea what my work entails or what qualifications it requires. Oh, Kevin leaned forward with exaggerated interest. Do educate us on the complex skills required to follow orders and march in straight lines. Meanwhile, I have negotiated 8-figure deals, managed hundreds of employees, and created actual wealth. Playing soldier might be exciting, but let us not pretend it is an achievement on the same level. My mother interjected smoothly, the Hendersons were asking about you last week, Eric. I told them you were in government consulting. Janet's son just started at Georgetown, studying international relations. Perhaps you two might have something in common. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Government consulting. You told people I am a consultant. My father dabbed his mouth with his napkin. It sounds more professional than military enlisted man. The Hendersons move in circles where certain appearances matter. I am not enlisted. I am a commissioned officer, I corrected, heat rising in my face. And I am not ashamed of my uniform, even if you are. No one is ashamed, my mother said quickly. We just find it easier to explain in terms our friends understand. You mean in terms that do not embarrass you, I clarified, the pieces suddenly falling into place. That is why you never displayed my graduation photos or commissioning ceremony pictures. Why you never mentioned my deployments or promotions to your friends. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Patricia chose that moment to clear the appetizer plates, her face carefully neutral as she moved around the table. You have to understand our position, Kevin finally said, his tone patronizing. Dad built a certain reputation in this community. Wilsons are known for achievement, for excellence, for leadership in business and philanthropic circles. Your choices reflect on all of us. And serving your country reflects poorly. It is not what people like us do, Natalie stated flatly as though explaining to a child. Military service is commendable for those with fewer options, certainly. But for someone with your background and education, it appears peculiar at best, possibly unstable. My father nodded in agreement. If you had joined as an officer right out of college, done a brief stint, then transitioned to a respectable defense contractor position or political appointment, that would make sense.
Strategic.
But 7 years in active duty, multiple deployments to godforsaken corners of the world.
People talk, Eric.
I sat back, momentarily speechless at their naked disdain. I cannot believe what I am hearing. Well, now you understand why we have been concerned, my mother said, apparently relieved that everything was now in the open. But you are home now, and we can help you make better choices going forward. I have a ceremony in Washington next week, I said, deliberately changing the subject before I lost my temper entirely. A military recognition event. I thought since I would be in the country, that perhaps some of you might want to attend. My father laughed, an actual derisive laugh that made my blood boil. One of those participation trophy ceremonies, where they hand out medals for completing basic training or whatever. That was the final straw. I reached into my uniform jacket and pulled out the small case containing my decorations, setting it on the table. This is a Bronze Star with Valor device, awarded for actions under enemy fire. This is a Purple Heart which I received after taking shrapnel to my shoulder and leg during an extraction operation. This Combat Action Ribbon represents direct engagement with enemy forces. And this, I pointed to the final medal, is a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat V for leadership during a particularly difficult operation. There was a moment of stunned silence before Kevin snorted. They certainly like their little trinkets, do they not? Like Boy Scout badges but for adults. Do they come with the uniform or do you have to buy them separately? Natalie asked with a smirk. My father shook his head with exaggerated patience. Eric, no one is saying your time playing dress-up and collecting pins has not been personally fulfilling. But you are 32 years old now. It is time to join the real world where adults do meaningful work with tangible results, not chase adventure and collect costume jewelry. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting for control. You have no idea what these represent or what it took to earn them. Oh please, Kevin rolled his eyes. We all saw Saving Private Ryan. Very dramatic, very heroic. But this is not 1944, and you are not storming Normandy. Modern military service is glorified peacekeeping and bureaucracy. I nearly stood to leave then. 7 years of estrangement had not prepared me for the depth of their contempt. But something made me stay, some need to make them understand to break through their willful ignorance. You want to know what real service looks like in the modern military? What earning these medals actually entails? I asked quietly. Because I can tell you, if you really want to know. Amanda looked alarmed. Eric, you do not have to justify yourself. But I was done hiding the reality of my service behind polite euphemisms. If they wanted to dismiss my choices, they would at least have to confront the truth of what those choices had cost. The dining room fell silent as I took a deep breath. For years, I had compartmentalized my military experiences, keeping the most difficult aspects locked away even from Amanda. Now I was about to share classified details that had only recently been cleared for disclosure. 3 years ago, my unit was deployed to a remote region of Afghanistan, near the Pakistani border. Our mission was ostensibly peacekeeping, but intelligence had identified increased insurgent activity in the area, particularly around a group of villages that had resisted Taliban influence. My father shifted uncomfortably, clearly unhappy with the conversation topic but unwilling to interrupt now that I had begun. We established a forward operating base and began regular patrols, building relationships with local elders and gathering intelligence. After 3 weeks, we received information about a planned attack on one of the villages that had a newly established girls' school. My team was sent to verify the threat and evacuate civilians if necessary. I paused, the memories flooding back with visceral intensity. The taste of dust in my mouth. The weight of my gear in the mountain heat. The faces of my men as we prepared for the mission. We were ambushed 2 kilometers from the village. Our lead vehicle hit an IED. The explosion killed Staff Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Rivera instantly. The second vehicle took heavy small arms fire from multiple positions. Lieutenant Parker was shot through the neck trying to provide covering fire for the wounded. My mother made a small sound of distress. Natalie's smug expression had faded into something closer to discomfort. Kevin stared into his wine glass. Half my unit was dead or seriously wounded within the first 3 minutes. We were pinned down, communications were damaged in the blast, and we were outnumbered at least 4-1. I did not tell them about the sounds the wounded made or how Lieutenant Parker had drowned in his own blood while I applied pressure to the wound, or how the 19-year-old private next to me had sobbed in terror as rounds impacted inches from our position. I managed to establish a defensive perimeter using the damaged vehicles for cover. We returned fire long enough to stabilize the critically wounded and assess our situation. That is when we heard the first explosions from the direction of the village. My father cleared his throat. "Eric, perhaps this is not appropriate dinner conversation." "You wanted to know what these medals represent," I replied evenly. "This is what they represent." I continued without waiting for his response. The insurgents had split their forces. The ambush was a diversion while the main group attacked the village. We could hear gunfire and see smoke rising. I had to make a decision, knowing that standard protocol would be to maintain position and wait for reinforcements. "What did you do?" Amanda asked softly. "I left 4 men with the wounded and led the remaining 6 on a flanking maneuver through a ravine the enemy had left unguarded. We approached the village from an unexpected direction and found it under heavy attack. The school was the primary target. 30 girls between the ages of 8 and 15 were trapped inside with their teachers. The dining room was completely silent now, even my father listening with reluctant attention. We engaged the insurgent forces from their flank, creating enough confusion for the villagers to begin evacuating to the caves in the hillside behind the settlement. I sent 2 men to assist with the evacuation while the rest of us provided covering fire. When we reached the school, we found 3 teachers killed execution style at the entrance, and the building rigged with explosives on a timer. My hands were steady as I took a sip of water, but I could feel my heart racing at the memories. We had 13 minutes to disarm multiple devices while under fire. Corporal Matthews had EOD training. He talked us through disarming the main charges while he worked on the trigger mechanism. We evacuated the girls through a rear window while the devices were being neutralized. The last child was barely clear when insurgents breached the front of the building. I unconsciously touched my shoulder where the scar tissue formed a jagged line beneath my uniform. The firefight inside the school lasted 22 minutes. We were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. I was hit twice, shoulder and leg. Corporal Matthews took a round to the chest, but his plate stopped it. Private Sanderson was shot through the hand. Somehow, we held our position until the QRF arrived with air support. "QRF?" Kevin asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Quick Reaction Force. Or backup." By the time they arrived, we had neutralized 11 insurgents and forced the rest to retreat. But the village was partially destroyed, and we still had wounded men at the ambush site needing urgent evacuation. I described the 3-day operation that followed, how we established a defensive position around both the village and our wounded, coordinating with air assets for resupply and casualty evacuation while continuing to receive intermittent fire from surrounding hills. I refused evacuation despite my injuries. We lost 2 more men during those 3 days. When the helicopters finally came for the most critical casualties, I stayed with the remaining forces until we had secured the entire area and ensured the safety of the village. My father was looking at me differently now, his expression unreadable. The intelligence we gathered during and after the operation led to the identification of 3 major insurgent cells planning coordinated attacks across the region. The information we secured prevented what intelligence services later confirmed would have been the deadliest coordinated attack since 9/11. I closed the metal case and returned it to my pocket. The operation remained classified until 2 months ago because of ongoing intelligence operations stemming from what we discovered. That is why I have never spoken about it, even to Amanda. The silence that followed felt weighted with unspoken recalibration. My brother Kevin stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between shock and reassessment. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears she was too controlled to shed. My father studied his plate with intense concentration. Finally, he cleared his throat. "This sounds like something from a movie, Eric."
Very dramatic.
The dismissal stung, but with less force than before. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the unwillingness to relinquish his narrative about my choices even in the face of undeniable evidence. Kevin pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. After a moment, he looked up. There was a small mention in the Times last month about declassified operations that prevented major attacks. No names were given, but the timeline matches. His tone held a note of surprised verification, as though he had expected to prove me wrong. "The ceremony in Washington is related to this operation," I said quietly. "Now that it has been declassified, formal recognition is being awarded to the surviving members of the unit and posthumously to those we lost."
And this is significant.
"In military circles?" my father asked, his question revealing both his continued ignorance and the first hint of genuine curiosity. "It is one of the highest honors that can be bestowed for combat operations, yes." My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "We had no idea, Eric. You never told us any of this." "You never asked," I replied simply. "In 7 years, not once did any of you ask about my actual experiences or achievements. You were too busy assuming I was playing soldier to consider I might be doing something that mattered." The remainder of dinner passed in uncomfortable conversation, the dynamic fundamentally altered but not yet transformed. My family had heard me, but they had not yet fully understood the implications of what I had shared. That would come later in Washington, when they would be forced to see me through others' eyes rather than their own limited perspective. As we finished dessert, my father attempted to reassert control of the narrative. "Well, this has certainly been enlightening. Perhaps we should discuss how this military experience of yours might translate to civilian applications when you complete your service." Still trying to pull me back into his orbit, still unable to fully acknowledge the validity of the path I had chosen. But there was a new hesitation in his manner, a slight uncertainty that had not been there before. "The ceremony is next Thursday at 10:00, I said, ignoring his comment. "At the White House. If any of you would like to attend, I can arrange security clearance." I did not beg. I did not pressure. I simply extended the invitation and let it hang in the air between us, neither expecting acceptance nor bracing for rejection. Amanda immediately said, "I would be honored to be there." My mother glanced at my father, then nodded. "We will all attend, of course. As a family." I saw my father's slight frown, my brother's hesitation, and Natalie's poorly concealed dismay. But the momentum had shifted, and none of them quite knew how to refuse without appearing petty after what I had revealed. "I will send the details to Amanda," I said, rising from the table. "Thank you for dinner. I have an early drive back to base tomorrow." As I walked out to my rental car, Amanda followed me into the cool night air. "They are trying, Eric. In their way." I smiled at my sister, the one true ally I had in this family. "I know. And I am trying too. But some things cannot be forced, they can only be demonstrated. I will see you in Washington." The drive back to base gave me time to process the emotional turbulence of the family dinner. Part of me regretted revealing details of the operation, feeling I had somehow cheapened the experience by using it to prove my worth to people who should have valued me regardless. Another part felt liberated, having finally given voice to events that had shaped me profoundly. Captain Rodriguez caught me in the hallway of the barracks the next morning. "Wilson, you good? You look like you went 12 rounds with your demons last night." I managed a tired smile. "Family reunion. Worse than any firefight." He nodded with immediate understanding. "The civilian world, man. They just do not get it. You still good for the ceremony prep Thursday? General Matthews wants a run through Wednesday afternoon." "Affirmative. My family may be attending." Rodriguez raised his eyebrows. "The same family you have been avoiding mentioning for 3 years. This I gotta see." The week passed quickly in a blur of preparation. The ceremony was receiving more attention than any of us had anticipated, with several cabinet members confirmed to attend alongside military leadership. Wednesday evening, as I pressed my dress blues and arranged my ribbons according to protocol, my phone rang. Amanda's name flashed on the screen. "Hey sis, everything set for tomorrow." Her voice held an unexpected note of tension. "Yes, but I should warn you. Dad and Kevin decided to come after all. Mom convinced them it would look bad if they did not show up to a White House ceremony." "For appearances," I said, unsurprised. "At least they are coming." "They are treating it like a networking opportunity," she admitted. "Dad mentioned something about defense contracts and government connections." "I am sorry, Eric. I had expected nothing less." "It is fine, Amanda. They can come for whatever reason works for them. I appreciate you giving me the heads up." "One more thing," she added hesitantly. "Natalie has been doing some research since dinner. Looking into your operation, trying to verify details. I think she is still convinced you exaggerated." Of course she was. The Wilson family skepticism ran deep. "Tell her to save her investigative energy for tomorrow. She will get all the verification she needs." The White House East Room had been transformed for the ceremony, with rows of chairs facing a podium adorned with the presidential seal. Military personnel in dress uniforms mingled with government officials in formal attire. American flags flanked the stage, and large screens were positioned to display citations and photos. I stood with my fellow honorees in a side room, all of us unusually quiet. Corporal Matthews, now Sergeant Matthews, adjusted his tie for the 5th time. "My parents are out there. My dad served in Desert Storm. Never thought I would end up in a ceremony like this. My wife brought our newborn," Lieutenant Ramirez added. "Kid will not remember it, but the photos will be something to show him someday." I spotted my family being escorted to their seats through a monitor displaying the main room. They stood out immediately, my father and brother in business attire rather than the formal wear most civilian guests had chosen. Their body language screamed discomfort, eyes darting around as though searching for familiar faces in a sea of military brass and government officials. Amanda sat beside my mother, both dressed appropriately in conservative dresses. Natalie looked annoyed, checking her watch and whispering something to Kevin that made him frown. "Family drama?" Matthews asked, following my gaze. "They do not exactly understand what we do," I replied. He snorted. "Join the club. My brother thinks I just play with big guns and dig foxholes." A White House aide appeared at the door. "5 minutes, gentlemen. The president has been briefed and will enter after you are seated." We lined up according to protocol, preparing to file into the East Room. As we entered, I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes following our small procession. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, several generals, and the Secretary of Defense sat in the front row. Behind them, families of the honorees occupied reserved seating, including my own family in the 3rd row. As we took our places on stage, I caught my father's eye briefly. For once, his expression held no judgment, only a dawning realization as he observed the deference with which we were treated by the highest levels of military leadership. The room rose as the president entered, everyone standing at attention until he motioned for us to be seated. The ceremony began with remarks from the Secretary of Defense, followed by a detailed account of the operation read by General Harrison, who had overseen the entire regional command. As the general described the ambush, the school rescue, and the intelligence gathered, I watched my family's faces. My father sat completely still, his usual air of superior detachment replaced by growing comprehension. Kevin leaned forward slightly, his attention fully engaged for perhaps the first time when I was speaking. My mother dabbed at her eyes several times. Even Natalie appeared stunned as the full scope of the operation was detailed by one authoritative speaker after another. When the general mentioned my name specifically, describing how I had led the counterattack despite being wounded and coordinated the 3-day defense of the village, my father's head snapped up, his eyes finding mine across the room. I held his gaze steadily, neither seeking approval nor expressing defiance. This was simply the truth of what had happened, finally being acknowledged in a forum he could not dismiss. Then came the moment that would permanently alter our family dynamic. The president approached the podium, thanked the general, and then did something unexpected. Instead of remaining behind the podium to deliver prepared remarks, he stepped forward and walked directly to where the honorees were seated. He stopped first in front of me. The room fell into a hushed silence as the commander-in-chief stood directly before me. Protocol dictated that I stand, which I did immediately, back straight, shoulders squared. What happened next broke from the carefully choreographed ceremony planned by White House staff. The president extended his hand, and as we shook, he spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the silent room. "Major Wilson, before we proceed with the formal recognition, I wanted to personally thank you. I read the classified brief on your operation multiple times. I know details that cannot be shared even today." This unscripted moment caught everyone by surprise. I could see my family in my peripheral vision, all leaning forward slightly as if unable to believe the personal attention being shown. The president continued, "When the bullets started flying and half your unit was down, you had every justification to call for immediate extraction. No one would have questioned that decision." He glanced toward the audience, his gaze seeming to find my family without knowing who they were. "Instead, you reorganized your remaining forces, created a tactical advantage from a position of extreme vulnerability, and proceeded to accomplish the mission objective under extraordinary circumstances." Then, in a gesture that sent a ripple of murmurs through the room, the president stepped back and rendered a formal salute. To receive a presidential salute outside of a passing review was virtually unprecedented. "Major Wilson, you saved more lives that day than anyone else in that operation. Not just your men and the civilians in that village, but potentially thousands who would have been targets of the attacks you helped prevent through the intelligence gathered." I returned the salute crisply, maintaining my composure through years of discipline, though my heart hammered in my chest. The president lowered his hand and turned to address the audience directly. "The citation you will hear today cannot fully capture what these men accomplished. When communications failed and they were outnumbered, when half their unit was wounded or killed in the opening minutes of an ambush, they not only survived but completed their mission under fire." He returned to the podium but continued to speak more personally than the prepared remarks would have suggested. "The intelligence gathered by Major Wilson and his team disrupted 3 major terrorist networks and prevented attacks that targeted civilians both in Afghanistan and potentially on American soil. The protocols developed based on their experience have been implemented across multiple theaters of operation, saving countless lives." The ceremony proceeded with the formal awarding of the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military honor. As the citation was read, detailing actions I had summarized for my family at dinner, I saw my father's expression transform. The skepticism that had been his default response to my military service had been replaced by something I had never seen directed at me before: genuine astonishment. When the medal was placed around my neck, I did not look at my father or brother. This moment was not about their validation. It was about honoring the men who had fought beside me, especially those who had not returned. After the formal presentations concluded, the president again departed from protocol. Rather than immediately exiting as planned, he approached each recipient individually, engaging in brief conversation before moving to the next. When he reached me again, he spoke quietly. "Your commander told me you refused evacuation despite significant blood loss and continued to lead the defense for 3 days. He also mentioned you requested that your Purple Heart citation not emphasize the extent of your injuries." I nodded, uncomfortable with this level of personal attention. "Humility is commendable, Major, but your country deserves to know what its best are willing to sacrifice. I have authorized the declassification of additional details of your operation for the historical record. Future officers will study your decisions." As he moved on to the next recipient, I glanced toward my family. My father sat perfectly still, his usual commanding presence diminished by the environment where his status carried no special weight. For perhaps the first time in his life, Thomas Wilson was not the most important man in the room. The reception that followed the ceremony was held in an adjacent room where honorees and their families could mingle with officials. I was immediately surrounded by senior military officers, many of whom had operated in the same region and understood the significance of what we had accomplished. From across the room, I could see my family standing awkwardly together, clearly uncertain of protocol in this unfamiliar setting. Amanda eventually broke away and approached, giving me a fierce hug. "I always knew you were doing important work," she whispered. "But I had no idea, Eric. No idea at all." She stepped back, composing herself. "Mom and Dad are processing. I think seeing all these generals and officials treating you with such respect has been a shock to their system." I was speaking with the Undersecretary of Defense when my father finally approached, Kevin trailing behind him. My father looked uncharacteristically hesitant, almost humbled. "Eric," he extended his hand formally. "That was quite a ceremony." I shook his hand, noting the uncertainty in his grip. "Thank you for coming." The undersecretary, sensing family dynamics at play, excused himself tactfully. My father gestured vaguely at the room full of military and government leadership. "You seem to know quite a few important people." "We have worked together," I replied simply. Kevin interjected, his tone lacking its usual condescension. "The president saluted you. Is that normal?" "No. It was unexpected." My mother joined us, her eyes red-rimmed. She had clearly been crying. Without speaking, she embraced me tightly, something she had not done since I was a child. When she stepped back, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your General Harrison mentioned to me that your actions established a new extraction protocol that has become standard procedure. He said it is now called the Wilson Protocol." The pride in his voice was tentative but unmistakable. After a lifetime of dismissing my choices, he had witnessed others of significant stature validating those same choices in terms he could understand. "Innovation, leadership, tangible results. The team deserves the credit," I replied. "Every man contributed to our survival and success." Natalie approached last, her usual confidence notably diminished. "I spoke with the wife of one of your fellow officers. She told me what those ribbons actually mean." She gestured to my chest with a hand that trembled slightly. "I owe you an apology." Before I could respond, the Secretary of Defense approached our small group. "Major Wilson, a moment of your time. The President has requested you join a small discussion about implementing your tactical innovations more broadly." As I excused myself, I caught my father watching me with an expression I had never seen before. For the first time in my adult life, Thomas Wilson was looking at his eldest son with unmistakable respect. The reception continued for another hour, during which my family witnessed something they had clearly never anticipated. Their son and brother being sought out by military leaders and government officials, engaged in serious consultation rather than mere congratulatory pleasantries. I caught glimpses of their reactions throughout, my father watching with increasingly thoughtful attention, my mother alternating between pride and what appeared to be retrospective distress at how they had treated me, Kevin observing with a kind of bewildered reassessment. When the official events concluded, I found my family waiting near the exit. The dynamic between us had shifted palpably, the ground beneath our relationship fundamentally altered. "We thought perhaps we might take you to dinner," my father said, his usual authoritative tone replaced by something almost tentative. "If you do not have other commitments." "I would like that," I agreed, surprised by the invitation. We found a quiet restaurant near the White House, the kind of place my father typically preferred with understated elegance and discreet service. Once seated, an awkward silence fell over the table, none of us quite knowing how to proceed in this new territory. My father finally broke the silence with uncharacteristic directness. "I owe you an apology, Eric. What I witnessed today," he paused, seeming to struggle for words, "I was wrong about your choices." Coming from Thomas Wilson, this admission was unprecedented. He had built his identity around being the man who was always right, whose judgment was infallible, particularly regarding his children's futures. "The truth is," he continued, studying his water glass, "I never understood why someone with every advantage would choose a path of such obvious hardship and risk. It seemed like rebellion for its own sake, throwing away opportunities others would kill for." Kevin nodded in reluctant agreement. "We thought you were running away from responsibility, not running toward something meaningful." "I never expected," my father hesitated again, "I never expected your service to involve that level of leadership or consequence. The way those generals spoke about your decisions, about lives saved and protocols established. They talked about you the way business journals talk about innovative CEOs. It was perhaps the only framework through which he could process my accomplishments, translating military leadership into terms he understood and respected." "What was it actually like?" Kevin asked suddenly, the question emerging with unexpected sincerity. "Not the official version we heard today. The real experience." For the first time, my brother was looking at me not with competition or judgment but with genuine curiosity about a life completely different from his own. I considered how to answer honestly without traumatizing my mother, who was already emotional from the day's revelations. "It was the most difficult and meaningful work I have ever done," I said finally. "There were moments of absolute terror, moments when I was certain I would die. But also moments of clarity and purpose unlike anything I had experienced before." I described the brotherhood formed with men from completely different backgrounds, united by shared purpose and trust. I explained how leadership worked in combat situations, how decisions made in seconds could determine whether people lived or died. My mother reached across the table to touch my hand. "I wish we had asked these questions years ago. I wish we had listened instead of just waiting for you to conform to our expectations." "We were wrong, son," my father added quietly. "Watching you today, seeing how you are regarded by people of significant accomplishment and authority, I realized something. You found your own path to excellence, one I was too narrow-minded to recognize." The admission clearly cost him, his pride visibly warring with his desire to bridge the chasm between us. "Would you consider visiting properly?" I asked, not quite ready to fully embrace reconciliation but willing to open the door. "My apartment in Alexandria is small, but I could show you what my life actually looks like now." The invitation seemed to surprise and please them. After dinner, we drove to my modest apartment, a stark contrast to the Wilson family estate but comfortable and distinctly mine. For the first time, my family entered my adult world instead of expecting me to fit back into theirs. They looked around with curious eyes, taking in the military precision with which everything was organized, the bookshelves filled with volumes on military history and international relations, the framed photographs of my unit in various deployments. These photos particularly captured their attention. My father studied one showing me with my arm around Sergeant Matthews, both of us dusty and exhausted but grinning after a training exercise. "You look different with them," he observed. "More relaxed, more yourself somehow." "They are my brothers in ways that are difficult to explain," I acknowledged. "When your survival depends on each other, it creates a bond that nothing else quite matches." Kevin examined another photo showing our unit helping build a school. "This is not what I pictured when I thought about what you do. I assumed it was all combat all the time." "Most of it is not combat," I explained. "It is building things, establishing security so normal life can continue, creating conditions where communities can function without fear." As the evening progressed, something began to heal between us. Not completely, not instantly, but genuinely. They asked questions they had never asked before. I shared stories I had previously kept to myself. For the first time in my adult life, I felt my family seeing me as I actually was, not as they had wanted me to be. When they left, my father paused at the door. "I am proud of you, Eric. Not because a president saluted you or generals respect you, though that certainly opened my eyes. I am proud of the man you have become, even if you had to become that man without my support." The months that followed brought gradual but meaningful change to our relationship. My father began reading books about military strategy and leadership, finding surprising parallels to business principles he valued. My mother asked about my friends in the service, learning their names and stories. Kevin and I developed a tentative friendship based on mutual respect for our different strengths. A year later, I was invited to another family Thanksgiving dinner. As I entered the familiar dining room, I stopped in surprise. On the wall that had previously displayed only Kevin's achievements and family events, I had missed hung a shadow box containing my medals and a photograph from the White House ceremony. My father followed my gaze and cleared his throat. I had it professionally mounted. It seemed important that it be displayed properly. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between business matters and my recent assignment training special operations candidates. My expertise was sought rather than dismissed, my perspectives valued rather than tolerated. After dinner, my father invited me to his study, a sacred space previously reserved for business discussions with Kevin. He poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed me one. "I have been thinking about legacy," he said, settling into his leather chair. "For years, I believed it was measured in buildings constructed, companies acquired, wealth accumulated and passed down. Material evidence of success." He sipped his scotch thoughtfully. "But watching you this past year, hearing about the men you have trained, the lives touched through your work, I have been reconsidering what truly matters when all is said and done." I listened quietly, giving him space to express thoughts that clearly represented significant evolution for a man so defined by traditional markers of success. "Your worth was never determined by whether you followed the path I laid out," he continued. "I was wrong to measure you by standards that had nothing to do with your true qualities. Your mother and I failed you in that regard, and I am deeply sorry." The apology, unqualified and straightforward, marked a transformation I had never expected to witness in my father. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know." In the years since, our relationship has continued to evolve. I eventually took a position training Special Forces candidates, finding profound fulfillment in preparing the next generation of servicemen and women for the challenges I had faced. Many came from difficult backgrounds, seeking in military service the purpose and belonging they had not found elsewhere. I recognized in them my own journey towards self-definition, the search for meaning beyond others' expectations. In guiding them, I found healing for my own past wounds, turning personal struggle into wisdom that could benefit others. My family story is not one of perfect reconciliation or dramatic transformation. My father still occasionally slips into old patterns of judgment. My brother and I still navigate moments of disconnection. But beneath these human imperfections lies a new foundation of mutual respect and genuine understanding. The most profound lesson I have learned through this journey is that our worth is never defined by others' approval or recognition, not even from those closest to us. True validation comes from within, from knowing that our choices align with our deepest values and contribute meaningfully to the world around us. Whether you wear a uniform or a business suit, whether you build skyscrapers or safe havens in war zones, what matters is not the external markers of success but the lives you touch and the difference you make through your unique contributions. My medals hang now in 2 places, in my father's study and in my own home, not as symbols of victory over my family's expectations, but as reminders that each of us must find our own path to purpose, even when that path leads through difficult terrain. If my story resonates with you in any way, if you have ever felt undervalued or misunderstood by those who should support you most, remember that your worth is not diminished by their failure to recognize it. Stand firm in your convictions, pursue your purpose with integrity, and trust that authentic recognition will come from those who truly see you, even if they are not the ones you initially hoped would understand. What expectations have others placed on you that conflict with your true calling? Have you ever had to defend your life choices to family members who did not understand your path? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe if this story touched something in you. Your journey matters, your choices have value, and your authentic path deserves to be honored, no matter who fails to see its worth.